Everybody, welcome to our webinar, our live event here. I'm Peter Diamandis, I guess best known for the X Prize, Singularity University, my books Abundance Bold and The Future is Faster Than You Think, and welcome to my Abundance Digital members, who I welcome you all. I'm here with a man who's become a close friend over the past few years, John Sculley. John, welcome, pal. Good to see you.
Thank you very much, Peter. Good to be with you.
I think everybody knows your name. I'll just mention, you've been entrepreneur, investor in over 50 high-tech companies, CEO of PepsiCo, CEO of Apple, 10 honorary degrees. I think something that's very cool is that you and I serve on a board together as co-vice chairman at Cellularity, which is a company in the thick of the whole COVID-19 activities. We're supporting a great CEO and entrepreneur, Bob Hariri. So having fun together on that front.
And it's a very exciting company. I'm thrilled to be a part of it. And I know you and Peter actually co-founded it together.
Yeah, Bob and I, yes.
You and Bob did. And it really is on the threshold of not only a breakthrough in cell therapy with a universal source material, the placenta blood cord stem cell, which can foundationally change the whole way we think about how do you scale precision medicine so that instead of saving the lives of several thousand, it could actually save the lives of many, many times that. So that's quite exciting. And then also the work that Bob Hariri has done at Cellularity on the COVID-19 has huge potential there. So
yeah, no, it's fun. We have an amazing board of directors and a science team at Cellularity. Maybe we'll talk about that a little bit towards the end here, depending on the questions. But just a shout out to everybody watching. The theme here, what I want to discuss with you, John, are two things. Number one, if you're an entrepreneur, and I serve a lot of entrepreneurs as you do, what should you be thinking during this global snow day that's going on, so to speak? What should you be thinking about? How should you be thinking about it? So that's topic number one. Topic number two, if you're running a business, how is business going to change post this global event, the COVID-19 pandemic, and what should you be thinking about? How should you be changing your mindset about what you're offering and such? So those are the two topics: your startup or your ongoing business. So which one do you want to talk about first?
Well, let's talk about the implications from prior crises, because this isn't the first time we've had a big crisis. We had the crash in 1987. For those who go back that far, we had, of course, the dot-com. We had 9/11. We had 2008 with the financial meltdown. But here's how I think about it.
Please.
If you go back to the dot-com era of the 1990s, which both you and I remember,
very well.
It was a time when people thought, well, maybe the internet's over before it really got started. And then just as it came up for a little air, in 2001, we had 9/11. And of course, that gave people even more discouraging outlook for high tech. But what's really interesting to me, Peter, is that during the 1990s, all of that dark fiber was being laid across the United States and other parts of the world. And at the same time, I was working with others, starting one of the first digital mobile wireless companies called Metro PCS. And we and others were building cell towers all across the country. Well, if that had not happened in the 1990s, when people had sort of written that all off because of hundreds of billions of dollars was lost,
yeah.
We wouldn't have made the transition in 2007 from 2G to 3G, and the introduction of the iPhone would not have materialized into what it materialized into, because the iPhone that Steve Jobs created was all about, you could send first photos and then video from a mobile device to another mobile device or to a personal computer. And it really was the beginning of changing the world that we know today. So the message there for me is that you have to look behind the events, connect the dots not only forward, but connect the dots backwards sometimes to events that have happened at times of crises.
And there's an equivalent going on right now, right?
Too.
We're deploying the entire 5G network around the globe, and Elon's launching Starlink, somewhere between 12,000 to who knows how many thousand satellites in orbit. And we're about to bring 3 billion new consumers online globally. Not like you and I came online on AOL back in the early 90s. They're coming on with gigabit connection speeds. And I think, I just published my book, The Future is Faster You Think, in January, John, that and I'm grateful for your support on that. And I think, that book looks at all the changes in every industry over the next decade. I think what's going on is we're accelerating all those changes. Everything's becoming faster.
Yeah, absolutely. And first, a shout out for the book. I loved your new book, and I also loved your previous books, Abundance and Bold, as well. But let me just pick up on one point. When 5G comes out, at some point, it's going to change the kind of experiences people can have with virtual reality. It will change all kinds of mobile devices, more particularly probably in the latter part of this decade. But it's going to have a foundational role for something like self-driving cars. I think this particular fact, and that is that there's about 750 megabytes of data every second that is created from the LiDAR systems in a driverless car. Well, when you start to have millions of cars on the road, the massive amounts of data couldn't possibly be handled without serious latency, which would crash and kill people if you didn't have the 5G technology. So 5G is not just cool new phones, but it's going to become foundational to the society that we're going to live, work, and play in
brand new and new business models. Absolutely. So let's so at some point, and when I think people are asking, when are we going back to work? I would say to everybody, guess what? You are at work. We're just working differently now. There's not a going back to work. We're at work, and so there's going to be some interesting changes. Like, for example, if I know in my companies, I'm operating at a super high frequency with a very rapid, very connected over Zoom meetings every day for half an hour or an hour with the entire team. And there's a high level of efficiency right now. I'm loving it, they're loving it. And so one of the questions is, where we go when the all clear sounds, and that may happen in June, July, or after a vaccine in December, who knows? But at some point, we're going to have the option to go back to the physical offices. Are people going to go back to physical offices, or is this going to be much more accepted? Listen, give me back 2 hours of my day doing this, and I'll be more productive.
Well, I think you really hit on something that I think about a lot. First of all, I don't run companies anymore, but I mentor founder CEOs of different businesses. I travel all over the place, all over the world. And as I have adapted to this safe isolation, I've discovered it's pretty darn interesting because I'm far more productive than I ever was. I'm not on airplanes. I'm not in hotels. Many of the meetings don't turn out to be quite as important when you discover you can do it on Zoom. Zoom's up to, I think, 200 million users right now. So I think that we're going to choose, a lot of us are going to choose less physical travel, which has a huge implication on business travel, hotels, airlines, and so forth. And I think we're finding it more and more productive. I also think that it's going to create a serious rethinking of how work gets done throughout organizations. In my opinion, because I work with new companies doing transformational platform types of solutions, that the type of culture we have, and I spend a lot of my time helping scale the culture. You get the culture right in the beginning and then you can scale it, but you got to be careful because you want to keep it on track. And the reality is when our young companies work with big established companies, particularly in the healthcare industry, they are totally mystified about our methods of working. You know, we have scrums where we use, you know, Agile, you know, we are very comfortable with Slack. You know, we're using all these tools that are still tools that weren't designed for the hierarchical model of middle management of large organizations. And I think these large organizations are going to be challenged. You know, it's always interesting to me how the economists say, well, there hasn't really been the productivity from all of these new so-called productivity tools that the tech industry is creating. Well, I think because we've been mapping it on the old way of working. It's been an amazing enlightenment that, wait a minute, these tools are for a new way of working, and many of us are doing it remotely from home.
Dude, 100%. It's like the old economic measures are invalid. They don't, you know, if I had time, I'd write a book on economics, because it's just completely wrong. You know, we're not measuring the right things anymore. And so it's going to be interesting. You know, I think the new most important leadership tools are going to be for CEOs are going to be agility, creativity, you know, the ability to manage virtual organizations, the ability to turn on a dime. You know, one of the things that I teach a lot is that the day before something is truly a breakthrough, it's a crazy idea, right? You know, Jobs is, you know, a million songs in your pocket, whatever the right number was back then, you know, a crazy idea, but it's a breakthrough. And a lot of companies, when I go to CEOs, I say, hey, where is your crazy idea department in your organization? Who are the people that are just generating insane, crazy ideas that are possible on the edge of converging exponentials? Because if you don't, you're not going to survive. And let me ask you a question. What percentage of the large companies are going to make it through this, do you think? Have you heard any numbers?
Well, I think it's just a matter of time, because some of the companies will make it through for a while, but they may not be as great a companies as they were before the coronavirus. I'll give you an example of something I think about. I learned back in my early days at Apple, when it was just a small team there at that time. When I first went to Apple, the headquarters was on the second story of a private house in Cupertino. And as you know, in any great creation, it's always a handful of people who do it. And people who've been in the entrepreneurial world fully understand that. But I think that we're going to have to learn how to build culture that's virtual. You know, we've always had culture in physical companies where people can come together. You have in Silicon Valley beer busts and communications meetings and stuff like that. But I think we're going to have to learn how to create and expand culture as business becomes more and more virtual, because there really isn't a reason why you have to have, you know, large headquarter buildings anymore, in my opinion.
Yeah.
You can have physical offices maybe in some occasions, but I don't think they have to look anything like what a physical office is today. WeWorks was kind of an interesting, you know, idea, but it didn't turn out to be everything that the founders thought. But there was a germ of inspiration there, and I think that we're going to see entirely new ways to express culture, and you've got to be able to express a virtual culture if we're going to be able to take full advantage of the types of connectedness that we're going to have in this decade.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's, you know, I talk about in my last book, the great migrations, and we're going to be migrating into a virtual world to a large degree, right? I'll be a US citizen, but I might also be a member of a virtual abundance world, or, you know, XPRIZE world, or whatever. And we're going to create new ways of interacting, new customs, new cultures, new traditions, that are going to be become the glue that empower us in those virtual worlds. Yeah. Let me get to some of the questions that are coming through here that I think are interesting. So thank you to all our Abundance Digital members who are throwing questions over the transom. So how could we see the situation launch in K through 12 education model? And will AI shorten the time arc for discovering an effective vaccine? Or is this time that, or does it take time and to discover and test? So those are two separate questions. They're both good questions. I think of two industries that are going to get absolutely transformed as a result of the pandemic and as a result of this exponential convergence having this decade, and that is education and healthcare. I think both of those massively disrupted and changed. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely, but I think transformation happens at the edges first. So, for example, let's take healthcare that you and I are both involved with.
Yeah.
I think that the high-tech industry came into the healthcare industry about 8 years ago and basically wasn't successful and retreated. Remember, Microsoft, Google, Amazon have all been there and they stepped back. I believe they're going to come back in again, but this time they will be very successful. And the reason is that it's logical that the high-tech industry bring in the things we know about sensors and AI and other technology capabilities to focus on preventative care. 75% of chronic care diseases are reversible. So preventative care, wellness are things that I think are particularly, really good problems for the high-tech industry to focus on. The traditional sick care industry, 7% of the population is about 50% of that $3.6 trillion spent every year. That's where the traditional healthcare industry focuses, and it's very complex. Rules, regulations, different at the state, different at the federal level, lots of special interests. So that's a much harder problem for the high-tech industry to crack into. If you go to education, I don't think the revolution is going to take place in the traditional institutions. I think it's going to take place outside the institutions. Everyone points to Khan Academy, which has been a remarkable success. I have a granddaughter now who's going to Stanford University Online High School, and she's loving it, except she's 14 years old and she's already 4 grades ahead of herself. Well, you can do those types of things when you're doing virtual education because it's geared to your own learning style and the speed at which you progress. But that would be very hard to skip 3 or 4 grades in a traditional school environment. So I think that we're going to see the next generation of connectedness, which will be smart connectedness, AI-enabled connectedness. It's going to have a real impact on the edges of education and on the edges of healthcare. And by the way, the innovation at the edges is even more important than if you tackle the center. Because to take, for example, when Steve Jobs created the first Macintosh, he was doing something that Silicon Valley thought was a waste of time. They used to call it the Steve Jobs reality distortion field, because he said, the future of computers is for non-technical people. So I, Steve Jobs, want to make computers that are so incredibly easy to use and so much of a wonderful experience, and enable you with the types of tools that can target on the humanities, not just the sciences. And of course, that turned out to be the largest part of the computer industry eventually. Started on the edge, but it ended up being significant. So I really think education and healthcare are going to be reformed, but they won't necessarily be reformed by the incumbents.
Yeah, I should mention that for all of our Abundance Digital members watching, John is actually an Abundance Digital member. And it was so funny to see your name come across. I was like, John, what are you doing here? It's awesome. And we have a poll going on right now, John, on the Abundance Digital platform, asking people, say in 5 years from now, who will be your primary healthcare provider in your home? And the options I give are Apple, Google, Amazon, an existing healthcare company, or a startup you've never heard of. And it's fun because the startup you never heard of is leading that poll. I voted for Amazon at the time, but anyway, I think that is true. We're going to see this reaction to the pandemic and COVID-19 are getting so many entrepreneurs frothing at the mouth, and people are feeling like the healthcare system is abandoned them. And if I had a service capability driven by AI in the home with sensors and scans and so forth that are not sick care, taking care of me after I'm sick, but true healthcare, monitoring my health with a personal dashboard, making us the CEO of our own health. I think that's super exciting, right? It's a vision that you've been investing in and helping mentor entrepreneurs in. And this is a perfect time to bring that to birth. Yeah.
Yeah, well, let me pick up on a couple of really good points you made. First of all, my answer to that question is hands down Amazon if they want to.
Yes.
Yeah, if they want to, because they are driven by data, and the innovation is all going to be about what you do with data. But they also are a transaction company, and they know how to build a supply chain, and they built one of maybe the greatest marketing brands in the world right now is Amazon Prime. It's not even actually a product, it's a membership. And it's a membership with loyalty and incredible benefits, but it gives them speed to scale. So if they wanted to go into the health insurance industry, they could come out with an Amazon Prime health insurance. If they wanted to go into a pharmacy, they put their toes in with PillPack. They could do something much bolder. You could go through different parts of the healthcare industry. Someone like Apple, Tim Cook has said that he believes Apple's most important legacy decades from now will be healthcare. They've had a huge success by sticking with the Apple Watch and getting it right. The first Apple Watch, the first two revs, I didn't particularly have much interest in one, but they've done a terrific job. I think in year 8, I think they're in now. But Apple is much more narrowly focused. They will not get into the data. They don't want to look at your health records themselves. They want to give you store stuff on an iPhone or an Apple Watch, and then they make partnerships with the first-tier health providers around the world. But that's a different, more narrow model than I think Amazon would go after. And then of course there's Google, who no one is further ahead in AI than Google in the world. And Google's coming at it from several different vantage points with Google Health under David Feinberg, and
Verily.
Verily with life sciences now. They have Enduro, which is in diabetes, that they did originally with Sanofi. So they have a number of different efforts. I think Google's challenge is to get focused. They have so much money. They try so many different things. They're so small.
We should properly call it Alphabet versus Google.
But they don't have the disciplined focus yet that Amazon has. That's why Amazon would be my vote.
It was on the Abundance Digital poll. I voted for Amazon as well, though I like the idea of it being a company we haven't heard of yet. By the way, let me just take a moment to mention anybody who's watching who's not a member of Abundance Digital. One thing I did this just recently was open it up. So there's a 30-day free trial. There's about 300 hours of content where you can learn about massively transformative purpose. How do you find yours? What is your moonshot? AI, robotics, 3D printing, synthetic biology, AR, VR, blockchain. I'm very proud of the program. It's Singularity University's official digital membership program. So 30 days free. Just go to abundance.digital. If you're interested in signing up for the 30 days free, just during this downtime for entrepreneurs, learning as much as you can is probably one of the most important things you can do. So here's another question, John. The service industry. How do you see service industries like real estate, hotels, even airlines changing? I mean, it's gonna be a struggle. I mean, I'd like to hear your thoughts first.
Well, let's take the airline industry. I think that's going to be a really, really tough road ahead.
Yeah.
Because I think somehow this exuberance of booming economy now for since 2009 has allowed us the ability just to spend money wherever we wanted to spend, and there was still a lot of profit left over. And I think that far more money has been spent on business transportation, business lodging, business facilities, business offices, than people are going to sort of come back to reality post the coronavirus and say, wait a minute, why were we doing all of those things at such an extravagant level? It's just like there was an era where people would build these Mac mansions and want to have as big a house as they could and 2 or 3 car garage and just, that was kind of like, this is the trophy of success. I think that the current generation, young generation says, what a waste of money.
Yeah.
I'd rather spend my money on the experience. I'd rather have a destination to go to or do something interesting. So, things that seem like what we want in one period turn out not to be relevant in another period. And the crises help be the borderline between one and the other. And I think the coronavirus is going to be a wake up for us that we have been over exuberant in spending in a lot of things. And there are a lot of things we can do differently. On the other hand, there's some industries, let's take telehealth. So I've been involved with telehealth for a lot of years. It's been one of the struggling industries to get people to have a recurring event. In other words, when they use telehealth, they would come maybe once a year, low utilization, very little reimbursement from the health insurance industry. And so someone has an earache, they could get a doctor's prescription, get it filled, in a matter of hours. That was a cool thing, but it wasn't really the foundation of an industry. Now, the industry has gotten a huge lift with the success of, say, Teladoc. Teladoc is now up to about $14 billion of market cap. They're going up over 80%, since the beginning of the year. Why? Because people realize that it's very practical to be able to have your most of your doctor appointments virtually online. It's more convenient, and of course we can't go out to these places anyway during the isolation period. So we're now moving from low acuity care to virtual primary care. Virtual primary care means recurring revenue. Recurring revenues means you can afford to acquire customers for a consumer acquisition business, which you can only do when there's recurring revenue. So just like we saw in the 90s, this is exactly the way that online banking began. A lot of skepticism. Now it's the mainstream of banking. Same thing is going to happen with telehealth. It's going to be the mainstream of a very large part of personal primary care, all done virtually.
One of the things I talk and I teach a lot about is that you need to be digitizing everything possible. And when you digitize, you dematerialize, demonetize, and democratize access to it, right? And telehealth is a perfect, you're dematerializing the doctor visit, and you're demonetizing it, making it available to everybody, democratizing it. Airlines, it's a double hit, a double whammy, because no one's going to want to be getting into cattle class anymore and sitting next to anybody. And then we're all realizing that, hey, this is almost as good as being there in person. And I hope a lot of the entrepreneurs here are watching and thinking about, how do I create a virtual meeting experience that's much better than the existing platforms, where it's not as good as or the same as, it's very different and it's much better, right? That's where we need to be aiming.
Yeah, I completely agree. So the thing that's been fascinating to me, we saw Zoom go public last year. I think after its post-IPO, it got up to like $7 billion market cap. Today, it's a $30 billion market cap. And there's no question Zoom is really easy to use, and I've used them all. I just saw today that Verizon is acquiring Blue Jeans. I always liked Blue Jeans too. I thought Blue Jeans was easy to use. I think some of the early generations, like Skype and WebEx, weren't as easy to use as Zoom. But someone's going to come out and give us an experience that will be even better than Zoom. It's inevitable, as you point out. And they'll do it with better security than Zoom has right now. So I would not look at the video conferencing world and say, oh, it's too late, I missed it, it's all over, it passed me by. Any more than I'd look at the telehealth industry and say, oh, Teladoc took the industry, it's all over. It's just a wake-up call that we're at the beginning of bringing the next generation of innovation to these industries.
Let's talk to the entrepreneurs out there. So here's the thinking: after every financial crisis and downturn, there is I was watching a comment from a friend of mine who, John Nosta, and I agree. It's like an asteroid. Pandemic is like an asteroid hitting the planet, right? And back 66 million years ago, the slow lumbering dinosaurs died, and the furry mammals scurrying around, which evolved into us, were the ones who survived and thrived. And so right now, we're going to see 20% of the companies out there get crushed and not return, and a number of them that should have died are going to pass on. A number of companies are going to kill products and services that weren't working and take that attention and capital and management focus and put it into new directions. But if you're an entrepreneur, historically out of the 2008 crisis came Airbnb and Uber and WhatsApp and Venmo and a whole slew of amazing companies. And so this is your time. This is your time to be in creative mode, to be thinking about great ideas. And like you said early on, you and I are just like, I'm bubbling. I'm like the level of creative energy and focus is I'm pegging it's pegged at 10 these days. I'm sure for yourself as well. So you got to be thinking about, what are the problems you're seeing? What are the challenges you're having day to day to day? A great problem is a great business opportunity. That's what entrepreneurs do. We find problems and solve them. So keep a notepad of all the stuff that isn't working and use that as fuel to invent your next business idea.
Yeah, well, I'll give you an example of one I'm working on now. So we see the success of AWS and Azure, and everyone says, well, I guess the cloud's done. Maybe Google will spend a lot of money and catch up, or now IBM's got new leadership, maybe they'll find a role in there. But they say, well, it's pretty much over. It's a two-horse race. Well, that's ridiculous. If you look at the total addressable market for the public cloud, we've only touched about 15% of it. And yet, if you add up the market cap of Microsoft Azure and Amazon AWS, if they were independent companies, you put them together, that's about $1 trillion of value. But the reality is we're just beginning to go into the hybrid cloud. We're just beginning to go into the second generation of edge computing. Yep. There are new problems to solve as data doubles every 2 years. We got more data on premise than we ever had before. We've got data distributed all over the place. We've got data that may be computed up in the cloud. How do you get data from the cloud to the edge to the on-premise and solve the latency issue? Well, at our company Vicinity, that's exactly what we do. We don't move the data, we move the compute to the data. And so there are opportunities to take industries that people think that the winners have already been declared. And it's not that those winners won't continue to be incredibly successful companies, but it's that we tend to underestimate, even when you see great success with new successful companies like Azure and AWS, we tend to think the game is over when the game is actually just beginning to another inning.
It's like Google coming in as the nth search engine, right? So it's really a matter of experimenting. And did I mention experimenting and coming up with new approaches? So some other questions coming in. One, you and I focus on longevity as part of our work with cellularity. The notion that the placental-derived stem cells are part of revitalizing your regenerative engine of your body. So people are asking, what's the impact on longevity? Have you thought about how COVID-19 will impact the work we're doing on longevity? And I honestly think that that we're going to see a lot more money, investment money, going into healthcare, and we're going to also see the FDA becoming more rapid in its approval cycles. So I think that this challenge we're having is going to increase the rate that we see new pharma, startup, longevity, vitality-driven products coming to market. What are your thoughts?
Well, if you go back to 1992, there was an amendment called the Kefauver-Harris Amendment that said the way the FDA gives drug approval for prescription drugs and other related type products was purely on safety. And they said, shouldn't we have a second requirement that there be demonstration of efficacy? And so a lot of politicians thought that was a good idea. So they changed the FDA ground rules that you had to have safety and efficacy. The result was that there was 60% less new innovation in drugs that followed. And so here we are, almost 60 years later, and the FDA is still adhering to the Kefauver-Harris Amendment, and neither Kefauver or Harris knew anything about medicine. Yet we're sitting here with the coronavirus, and we're saying, well, we have to have a double-blind testing technique, and it has to be, clinical trials under these conditions. And we have really excellent people who have run the FDA. This is not a question of talent running the FDA or talent of people in the FDA. It's an issue that they're being
constrained
in by criteria that's no longer relevant in terms of what science is able to do. And so I think we have so many ways that we can test and get things out quicker. There's no question that we would be in a better place now if we'd been better prepared, if we had more tests, if we had more treatments, if we had more vaccine works going on. I mean, all of these things that Americans' ingenuity of inventiveness is just as good in the life sciences as it is in technology. But we have to have some rethinking of the constructs of how we do things and how we approve things.
So I agree. And we have brand new tools coming to the market that are enabling small entrepreneurial teams to do what only the largest healthcare and pharma companies were doing before. So one of the entrepreneurs that I've invested in and supported, Alex Zebarankov, is the CEO of In Silico Medicine, and he's using generative adversarial neural networks to come up with new drugs, and doing with a team of 40 what a team of 4,000 used to do. And we're about to see, it isn't here yet, it's still a couple years off until we get the error rate down, but we see quantum computers coming in and help us model new antibody, antigen, active site, protein interactions. And it's gonna create again, sort of a Cambrian explosion of personalized medicine that's gonna be awesome.
Well, the thing I think about, Peter, was you remember when Craig Venter, you know Craig because you started a company with him, Human Longevity, but when he did the human genome sequencing, it cost over $2 billion.
Yeah. And
now we know that Illumina and others can do a gene sequencing for well under 1,000, going to 100, probably eventually to $10. So if you think about quantum computing, we got pretty impressed with what you could do with 26,000 genes with computing. Then we got impressed with what you could do with 2 million proteins. And now we're starting to think of the microbiome. Well, as you know better than I do, there are about 30 to 40 trillion biomarkers in the microbiome. And that mysterious part of a human, I think a lot of us believe is going to be one of the most fertile grounds for the future of precision medicine.
Yeah, it's one of the companies I'm invested in by a mutual friend, Naveen Jain. Viome is looking at transcriptomics, looking at not what are the DNA of the microbiome, but what are the genes being expressed. Anyway, there's a huge amount, and I just think we're going to see people's desire for health and health knowledge. The term I use, John, is making ourselves the CEO of our own health.
Yeah.
Right? And it's like AI, there's going to be, Ray Kurzweil's prediction is that we're going to have human level AI by 2029, and he's sticking to it. And so we're all going to have a version of Jarvis from Iron Man that you give permission to, look at your blood chemistries, what you're eating, all of the data coming from your Oura Ring, your Apple Watch, all of that. And it is going to monitor our health, not once a year for a physical, but minute to minute, and say, your heart rate variability is lower and your temperature is higher and these micro mRNAs in your bloodstream are showing up. Let's check this, right? Anyway, it's amazing. Let me get a couple more questions here while you comment on that.
Well, here's what that reminds me of. Back in the late 80s, I was part of the team who recruited Kai-Fu Lee from.
Yes, I know Kai-Fu. He's great.
And
yeah.
Kai-Fu and I have been great friends ever since. So Kai-Fu was an expert in phonemes, and he developed the first virtual digital assistant, which was called Casper, running on a Macintosh. And he and I demonstrated it with Joan London on Good Morning America. Well, we've seen the virtual digital assistant become a commercial product, but the current generation, even of Alexa, which is a wonderful commercial success, is a request and respond architecture. You ask it a question, it quickly responds with an answer. The next generation is going to be much more like Google Duplex. It's going to be conversational.
Yes.
And think about what that means when you go conversational with a virtual digital assistant. Think of the lonely people who are sitting in a mobile home or a one-room apartment or wherever they happen to be, who are lonely. They aren't feeling well, and you got to keep track of them. And we don't have enough people to go around and be the caregivers. So the conversational virtual digital assistant can play a really important role as the society ages and people more typically start to live well into their 90s or even longer.
Yep.
The virtual digital assistant, I think, is going to be a key foundational to the future of personalized health.
I agree, dude. I'm just sitting here smiling about how absolutely sharp and spot on you are. I love your brain, John. I love your brain. Here's another question. It says, Peter and John, what do you see the spending pattern is going to look like? Are people going to be more cautious coming out of this? And then what I want to tag on to that is we haven't even seen the economic implications yet in terms of quarterly earnings hit the stock market, I don't think. I'm curious. So spending patterns of people coming out of this, and then what's our economic impact here?
Well, I'm going to start with the economic impact because that's the simplest one. The stock market does not measure the present. The stock market is valued on the future. So if the stock market believes that we're going to get past the coronavirus sometime in 2021, hopefully early in 2021, then even with these drastic drops in employment and missing earnings and even complete shutdowns of industries like restaurants and theme parks and cruise lines and things of this sort, I think the stock market will survive it if there's real confidence that we're going to get past it. Unfortunately, there has not been the level of competence in either preparation or even thinking through what it takes to get from here to there. And here to there requires testing of the people who are infected, testing the people who have come out and survived being infective, trying to identify the carriers, and then eventually getting a vaccine. that sounds realistic sometime in 2021. It doesn't sound realistic, certainly not at scale in 2020. So I think as we get optimistic that that's possible in 2021, that the stock market will survive this. What isn't easy to deal with are all the people who are going to be out of jobs, because a lot of those people are not going to be reemployed. If you think about the projections on the gig economy in the US, the estimates were that we'd be at almost between 40 to 50% employment of people would be members of the gig economy, which could be anything from people delivering food for restaurants that have a takeout delivery service to highly skilled work being done by contractors. My sense is the gig economy is going to play a bigger role in the future than it has now, and that we're going to see that higher skilled people are going to be a bigger part of that. And that's because they're either going to choose to, or the communication connectedness will enable it, or people will be more comfortable with contractors. And I think it's going to become more defined in clarity of licenses, benefits, all of those political issues which will be dealt with, I suspect.
Yeah, I'll add on to that, John, that part of the gig economy isn't the person here that lives local to you in West Palm or Santa Monica. If I've gotten so comfortable working with my team over Zoom, what do I care if the person's on the other side of the planet? If we've got a good bandwidth connection, if I can get twice the talent at half the price, I might start employing people who are part of my core team, and they're on Slack, they're on Zoom, but they live in Indonesia or in India or Bangladesh.
You're absolutely right. And the thing which I get outraged about is the complete misunderstanding by so many politicians about immigration, because you and I know that so much talent has come into the most innovative industries from immigrants. Well,
absolutely, 100%.
Even if people try to build walls, which is pretty ridiculous, that it's harder to have a video wall. And I think that we're going to find that
I love that
there's going to be a lot more connectedness, and immigrants aren't going to, the true global economy is not just the supply chains, which get complicated, and the types of political dealings going on of threats to what one could do against the supply chain. The real global economy is the global economy of talent, and the connectedness of talent being able to work wherever you are. I have a team in London with our company called Zedson Laboratories, and they are an amazing group of physicists, PhD, data scientists, engineers and stuff. And I love working with them. We're on the phone every morning, US time. And whether they're in London or whether they're here on the East Coast where I am, or whether they're in California, it really doesn't make any difference. And as the quality of communications and communications tools get better and better, and by the way, they will, because yes, Wi-Fi is going to get better. That's the
next generation Wi-Fi, 100%. The 5G experience.
The thing is not a 5G phone.
Yeah.
As cool as it sounds, it's better Wi-Fi.
It's John,
let's get on radio services.
I love this. So here's my question to you. There's going to be a lot of pressure from companies to localize their supply chain, right? Because a lot of companies got really hammered hard by the shutdown in China and so forth. So as people move towards that, local manufacture, even local 3D printing and so forth, the question is, our move towards globalization, is that going to slow down? Or are we still going to have globalization and, in addition, local supply chain manufacturing? What are your thoughts on that?
Yes and yes. I think we'll still have globalization with the supply chain. It's going to get a little. It's not going to look like Davos anymore. It's going to look like very pragmatic decisions, lots of political considerations, in regions of the world. So the supply chain is going to be far more influenced by that. It isn't just about coming up with new technology innovations. On the other hand, the real global economy of talent is only going to be, more accessible to work in more virtual ways, and the technology is only going to be more enabling for the talent, whether you're in India or Israel or South Africa or Eastern Europe, Canada, US, wherever it's not going to make any difference. And most of us realize, I mean, people like you and I, Peter, we live on a 24-hour clock, right?
100%.
If we have to do something at 3 in the morning, we'll do it at 3. It doesn't make any difference to us. And that's more and more the way the world's going to work.
Yeah. So it is an interesting question that came over. It says, do you think we should focus on smaller planes and larger numbers of smaller airports? So let me just comment. I'm a board member.
What do you think?
What's that?
I said, you're a pilot.
Yeah, I'm a pilot, but I'm a board member of a company called Verijet that a brilliant entrepreneur, Richard Kane, who's an AI expert and a pilot, has put together. And the realization was while there are like 25 major airports in the US, there's something like 7,000 small airports. And finally, we're getting airplanes like the Cirrus jet, the Vision jet, that is super high fuel economy and comfortable cabin for zipping around. And what's going to happen, interestingly enough, is ticket prices for airlines are going to start to go up dramatically because they're flying less and they're putting less people on the airplanes. So there's going to be a point at which getting a coach ticket on a 757 is going to be, you could fly private instead and go to the local airport. So I think there is going to be explosion of small private aircraft operators for super efficient jets. So that will be interesting a lot. I'm a mile from Santa Monica here.
I think there are two considerations there. One is that the Cirrus jet, as you talked about, is a Part 21, which means you can have one pilot, not a pilot and a co-pilot.
Yeah.
And second of all, you really want a better traffic control system that's in the sky that will enable these small airports that don't have a tower, have completely safe, accurate, regardless of weather conditions for these small planes. And yes, why not? I agree with you.
The Vision jet does have Garmin's new safe return, which if the pilot becomes incapacitated, there's a big red button on the roof. You press it as a passenger and the airplane takes over. It steers around weather, it finds a local airport and it lands you there and stops the engine. And it's amazing, it's magic. And it's a new Garmin system that's being, and we're living in such an amazing world.
Yeah.
Science fiction is constantly becoming science fact. It's awesome. Yeah. So, let me ask a few more questions here. Thoughts on the future of the restaurant industry? Seems like folks are going to be more inclined to eat at home after this healthier and better. So I'm eating better. I'm meditating more. I'm exercising more. I'm sleeping better. I'm more productive than ever before. I mean, I love it. It sounds like you do as well. Let's talk about the restaurant industry. My heart goes out to a lot of the small restaurants and mom and pop shops that ain't going to make it. What are your thoughts here?
I think a lot of them aren't going to make it in. And New York City, 27,000 restaurants.
Wow.
And they're all shut down unless they're doing a takeout service with one of the delivery services. But at the very least, they're going to be different. You take a big urban topology of restaurants. They're usually small interior space, tables close together. That's not realistic, I think, in the post COVID-19 world. And even when COVID-19 is solved. So I think it's going to be very hard that let's just take New York, all 27,000 restaurants will come back.
I think the restaurants are going to have to rebuild with a anti-fragility mindset, which is every restaurant's going to be having a home delivery service built in from the beginning. They're a kitchen that delivers and has a front end as well. I mean, I think that's obviously going to be inevitable. And I think we're going to start to see companies like Starship that has the little delivery robots, you know, the 6-wheel delivery robots, and Amazon and FedEx are having their own versions, and drone delivery that will bring stuff. It's going to become, I think of it as, I use the term automagical for automatic and magical, where you want something and it comes to you. Hospitality, how are we going to cope with that? How are we going to, like hotels, conference centers, events?
I think you have to really ask, why do we need these giant conference centers? Every mid-sized city in the United States either has or has a desire to have a large business conference center, usually trade show type space. But the expenditure for just trade show budgets, anyone who's been involved with businesses that participate in trade shows, I mean, these are major expenses for companies. And you sit and say, gee, I can go and build a technology with a company and use AWS or Azure, and then I have to go, and that's very affordable. I can do that with not much of an expense budget. But then I turn around and I got to go to trade shows, and I got to staff them up and build booths and all of that. And they say, do I really need to do that anymore? And so I think we're going to have to rethink a lot of those big industries and say, does that make sense?
I totally agree. And again, hospitality, the hotels, there's going to be a health overlay that's going to have to be in consideration here. So for example, Emirates Airlines has testing before you get on the airplane right now. So they'll do a 15-minute PCR test. That's interesting. Are you going to be, when you check into a hotel, you have all these guards after 9/11, right? What changed was you just couldn't enter a building anymore. You had to show your ID, you had to have a government ID and all of that stuff. And I wonder if you're going to now have viral testing as you go into a building, an airline, a hotel.
Well, and a lot of that we'll probably do pretty remotely. As an example, one of my good friends, Steve Perlman, who invented Apple QuickTime, which we'll all remember, and many other things, and invented P-Cell, which is another generation of 5G, actually invented a way to take an electrical field and be able to destroy a virus so that you could actually go into a space without taking any medication and be able to destroy viruses, and theoretically it hasn't been built out. This is just one of his inventions that he patented, but it's an example that there are going to be entirely different ways to approach things. As I get more involved with you, Peter, into the life sciences and cell therapy, and I see the small number of patients that are actually saved with things like CAR T, chimeric antigen receptor T cells. And yet you look at something like breast cancer at our company in London, Zedson, we're able to take an electrical field, look through a lady's breast, and identify early detection of a cancerous tumor long before a mammogram. So then you sit there and say, can I save more lives with early detection? Can I save more lives with treating the cancer once it is understood and known? So we're going to attack it at many different vantage points is the point. It's not one's versus the other. There's so many innovations going on in so many different fields that we're going to be solving problems, in many different ways, often the same problem. So
I love that. I want to take this, if it's okay with you, John, we'll go for a few minutes after one here for another 10 minutes. Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay, great. I'm loving this. Augmented and virtual reality. Let's dive into that a little bit. Apple, very famously, there's a buzz that Apple's going to be coming out with an augmented reality, and Tim said that AR is far more important than VR. At the same time, we're seeing VR from HTC, from Facebook, and from a number of other players coming in. I love my Oculus Quest and also my HTC Vive, and my kids love it and are playing with it all the time. What are your thoughts? Are we going to get this massive lift like we did with Teladoc on AR and VR coming out of this?
Well, I think for Apple, it does make sense to focus on AR, augmented reality, because Apple is really the iPhone company, and you say what comes after the iPhone, and certainly augmented reality can either be what comes after, or it could be a transition of the iPhone to what comes after, and it ties in all the smartness with data science and machine learning and deep learning. So it's a logical place for Apple to be thinking. However, I think virtual reality will also find a role, but it may be with different companies. Maybe the first taste of it we'll get is at the 2021 Olympics in Japan, because I suspect that we'll probably see some examples of watching the Olympics in a more virtual, real-time experience by then. Maybe not everyone gets to see it, but there'll be enough demonstrations that it'll be something which will certainly capture, at least the tech community and the media community's interest. So I think both will have a role, but they may not come from the same companies.
Yeah, agreed. I just participated in a keynote in China in VR, where I was filmed in VR in a way that was much more compelling because I got to like create things around me in VR to tell a story versus just a talking head. And it was in China, and it was and I was there. It was like 50,000 people participated, and I got to watch myself give my recorded VR conversation and talk to people next to me. It was amazing. And so I think we're going to start to see, VR is still very early.
Yeah. Well, I thought one of the really interesting, you may have seen it on 60 Minutes with the sort of the aging Holocaust survivors, and they shot them in 360, and they asked them enough questions that by using some machine learning combined with the 360 views of the Holocaust survivors, you could actually carry on a conversation with them as though they were there. That was like talking to a hologram. And while that was, early days, so sort of like back in 1987, we did something called the Knowledge Navigator, which was a simulation of what we thought a computer would look like 20 years later in 2007. And it looks remarkably like an iPad. Anyone someone who has an iPad today will say, well, what's so special about that? It looks like an iPad. Well, it was in 1987. That's what's unusual. And so the same thing is happening now. We're getting these kind of early stand-ins to sort of tease our intellect and curiosity. And yet they're going to be very commonplace, 10 years from now. And as you say, in exponential time, things move even faster into the future. So we may get them sooner than that.
Yeah, no, I'm clear. We're going to see a lot of acceleration coming out of this. And for entrepreneurs, now is a great time to be an entrepreneur and to be in your creative engine, and find fellow entrepreneurs online. For my Abundance Digital members, now is an amazing time for you guys to play. Here's another question came over. Will universal basic income be a solution to support the economy and support individuals? In one sense, that the checks that the Treasury are putting out to everybody is like a UBI payment. What are your thoughts on universal basic income, John?
Well, I have to start by saying, first of all, I'm an entrepreneur capitalist. So I believe in a capitalist system. But there can be many versions of democracy. We just happen to have one that's anchored back 200 plus years ago. And so I don't necessarily think that you have to be restricted to just one version of a democratic system. And when I first heard about universal basic income, I said, gee, that's a terrible idea. Well, I have to tell you that as we live through the coronavirus, and I look at the people's lives that are being impacted, and the economy is so steered to give the rewards of success to people like you and me who are in the technology or life science worlds, or people in the financial world. And you look at the people like the healthcare workers and the people who are, doing all of the heavy lifting jobs, and they're getting crushed.
Yeah.
So I'm much more sympathetic to whether it's called universal basic income or something else, but I'm much more sympathetic that there has to be some provision for people who are really have no other realistic alternatives.
Yeah, and we're heading, and I too, I'm a capitalist entrepreneur. I would describe myself there with libertarian bents, but I think about the fact that we're demonetizing the cost of living, right? Yeah. Everything is becoming cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. Autonomous cars, the poorest people will be chauffeured around for something that's 4 times cheaper than owning a car. These just, solar energy is giving us free, global, abundant energy in the poorest countries in the world, or the sunniest countries in the world. Let me end on this question that came in, which is, I'm thrilled to see how tech can improve healthcare and other arenas. However, how do we balance that with the loss of human connection? If being in isolation has taught us anything, it is clear that we need human connection. So a great question about our humanity. What are your thoughts there?
Well, I think we absolutely do need human connection. And I think the coronavirus self-isolation, shelter in is, impacting people a lot. But here's what I think. I think the constructs of how we assemble have to be completely reimagined. We need a new architecture. We talk about conversations in the global square, and I think that universities have priced themselves out of the market.
It's ridiculous.
Priced themselves out of the market.
Yes.
Why do they keep building businesses and they never eliminate courses? They're like the federal government who never cancels a program. They just keep adding another one. So I think universities are at risk. I think traditional institutions are at risk. Too much capital going into things just because we always did it that way. So I think we need a rethinking. And I suspect that the younger generation may actually still gravitate towards urban market solutions of where they want to live, but it may not be in the same urban areas. In other words, as much as I love New York City, I was born there and grew up there, but it may not be a sustainable urban model for another generation. You have to be very, very rich, to be able to live there and have a family. So I suspect that there'll be a new generation of cities because of virtual communication connectedness. The cities can be almost anywhere, and whether it's we've seen how cities like Pittsburgh completely recycled themselves, and they're just wonderful cities to live in now. And they were steel town just a few decades ago. It'll either be converting old cities or be creating brand new cities. But I think that urbanization may take place in places that we haven't really thought much about.
John, this has been a blast for me. Thank you. I really have enjoyed this conversation. Thank you to you and Diane for support and getting this going. And I'd love to do this once a quarter with you if you're up for it.
Sure. I'm like you. I have an insatiable curiosity. I'm up, as Diane reminds me, I'm up every morning at 5 a.m. regardless of when I go to sleep. And this is how I live life. So I love this kind of stuff.
Yeah, and excited for our upcoming Cellularity board meeting and the use of natural killer cells to augment immunity. Yeah. All right, John, take care, my friend. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. I hope this was useful to you, and I hope you're all safe and healthy, and I hope you are more creative now than any time ever. So
thanks, and you as well. I mean, you're inspiring to all of us.
Thank you, pal. Be well, John. Take care.